engage in recreation. The Office of Aviation Consumer Protection, a unit within the U.S. Department of Transportation's Office of the General Counsel, is responsible for assessing the need for and drafting regulations defining the rights of passengers and obligations of airlines under the Air Carrier Access Act. That office also investigates every disability complaint filed by air travelers against airlines and monitors compliance, conducts investigations, and enforces as appropriate for violations of aviation civil rights requirements against airlines. In addition, it meets regularly with disability rights advocates and ensures the department's website contains clear, useful information about the rights of air travelers with disabilities. Staff in the office are dedicated public servants who are committed to continuing to work to make air travel accessible to all. I know that many of you here are also champions of the Air Carrier Access Act and have fought to make it possible and to keep it improving through the years. I applaud you for what you've already accomplished and encourage you to continue working to make our air transportation fully accessible. Today, we have an exciting program for you with leaders from government, industry, and the disability community. These leaders will provide their perspective on this landmark legislation, the great strides the United States has made in access and inclusion, and the obligation we share to continue moving forward. It's my great honor to introduce the first of these speakers, U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg currently serves as the 19th Secretary of Transportation, having been sworn in on February 3rd, 2021. Prior to joining the Biden-Harris administration, Secretary Buttigieg served 2 terms as mayor of his hometown of South Bend, Indiana. A graduate of Harvard University and a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, Secretary Buttigieg served for 7 years as an officer in the U.S. Navy Reserve, taking a leave of absence from the mayor's office for a deployment to Afghanistan in 2014. In 2019, the secretary launched his historic campaign for president. He suspended his campaign in early March 2020, and throughout the rest of 2020, he campaigned for the election of the Biden-Harris ticket and served on the advisory board for the presidential transition. In December 2020, he was nominated by President-elect Biden to be Secretary of Transportation. He was confirmed by the Senate on February 2nd, 2021, becoming the first openly gay person confirmed to serve in the president's cabinet, any president's cabinet. During his confirmation hearing and as DOT secretary, Pete Buttigieg has emphasized the importance of accessible transportation and inclusion for persons with disabilities. And with that, it's my great honor to turn the mic over to Secretary Pete.
Well, thank you, John, for your introduction and for your terrific work at the department and the whole team of colleagues that you lead. And thank you and welcome to everybody who's part of this gathering. I'm so glad to be able to be with you to celebrate the 35th anniversary of the Air Carrier Access Act. And I want to start by recognizing some of the many champions for equality in air travel who are with us right now. We're going to be joined by U.S. Senators Tammy Baldwin and Tammy Duckworth, U.S. Representatives Garrett Graves, Jim Langevin, and Rick Larson are here. And I want to thank and recognize each of them for their leadership. Emily Vordy, White House Associate Director of Disability Outreach, is with us. Charles Brown of Paralyzed Veterans of America, and all of the advocates joining today. Thank you for your work. Kevin Burke of the Airports Council International, Nick Callio of Airlines for America, Dr. Rory Cooper, veteran Paralympian, inventor, and author, Kelly Buckland, who has been such a leader and is now helping us move the work forward as a member of our Department of Transportation team. So to everybody who has played a role in reaching today, and everybody who is involved in moving us forward for tomorrow, I want to thank you. As so many here know from personal experience, prior to the ACAA, air travel for passengers with disabilities was not guaranteed. Many were denied access altogether. So many of our most important moments in life depend on being able to get where you need to go. It is so central to our personal and professional lives. And if you're not able to travel solely because somebody has decided it is too hard to accommodate you, then your world almost literally shrinks. It's not fair, it's not right, and it's not smart for a country to constrict the lives of almost 70 million Americans. So we know that transportation can be a barrier to accessibility, or it can be a way to break down barriers and allow everyone to reach their fullest potential. The ACAA prohibits discrimination based on disability in air travel. And when it passed 35 years ago, it improved life for so many people in so many ways. The Air Carrier Access Act is one of America's great civil rights achievements. And the administration and this department are committed to making good on the promises of this legislation. So today we celebrate the ACAA and the advocates who made it possible. Tomorrow, we have to keep working to make our transportation system more accessible because we all know that our job is far from done. For example, most domestic flights are operated with single aisle aircraft, including a large share of long cross-country flights. But there's still no requirement for accessible lavatories on single aisle aircraft. So many passengers with a disability are forced only to be able to use shorter flights with connections or to resort to drastic means such as dehydrating themselves. And some are simply not able to fly at all. Travelers who use wheelchairs also too often fear for the safety of their devices. Some months we take in more than 1,000 mishandled wheelchair complaints at our department. And as colleagues and friends here have made clear, if your wheelchair is damaged during the flight, it's almost as though part of you arrived and part of you didn't at your destination. And that's unacceptable. Airlines have a clear responsibility. Some airlines are doing better, some worse, but for all of them, it's a moral imperative and an economic imperative that we address this. Because thousands of broken wheelchairs means thousands of people who cannot rely on their ability to earn a wage for their families or contribute to America's economy, sometimes for weeks. So even as we're considering future legislation, we have to make progress implementing our existing laws in a way that lives up to the spirit and the aspirations of those who delivered. And I want to share a little more about what we're doing to that end. This December, we're planning to host a public meeting that'll focus on improvements in the design of onboard wheelchairs used to access lavatories on aircraft. We're actively working on a proposed rule to increase the size of lavatories on new single-aisle aircraft. When published, we encourage the public to review and comment on it. Matter of fact, we are planning to send it over to the White House this week as part of that process. And of course, we're continuing our engagement with the ACAA Advisory Committee. And I want to thank the members of that committee, some of whom are right here at this event, for your vital work. It helps our staff gain important insight into how we can continue to make air travel more accessible. We're looking forward to receiving their report shortly, and we hope to translate as much of it as we can into our work, including as we finalize the Airline Passengers with Disabilities Bill of Rights. Our department takes seriously our responsibility to enforce the ACAA. We recognize that this is an area where, candidly, the department has not always been as active as it could be. So we are recommitting right now to make it a priority. Stepping back, I want to point to something that applies not just to transportation issues, but across society, which is that we need to change more swiftly. We see too often a slowness to improve accessibility in so many areas of life at a pace that so many Americans would never accept if it were their own equality on the line. Now, the truth is, change can happen quickly. The time from the Supreme Court decision that declined to recognize the rights of passengers with disabilities to Congress passing the ACAA was only 4 months. And the truth is that disability cuts across every demographic. And of course, diagnosis of disability can happen at any point in any person's life. So many Americans who don't view themselves as part of the disability community today will age into it tomorrow. And the truth is that advancing equity and accessibility benefits everybody, whether they're part of the disability community or not at the moment. Angela Glover Blackwell has eloquently made the point that curb cuts, which were introduced as an essential accommodation for wheelchair users, also ended up making life better for parents with strollers, people on bicycles, anyone pulling a rollerboard suitcase. And as she put it well, we are one nation. We rise or fall together. I'll end with a final thought, which is that there's legislation, there's regulation, and then there are just the millions of decisions that everyday people make in the course of every day. And sustained change requires attention at all three of those levels. So to everyone who at some point will make a decision that affects access and accessibility. It could be a work policy for your company, an infrastructure decision in your community, or any number of other choices. I ask that you be intentional in choosing the side of equality and consistently asking others to do the same. And I assure you that in that, the department will be there with you. We will accelerate our work toward a transportation system that is accessible to everyone. And that's across the entire system, whether you're boarding a flight overseas or going across the street for a cup of coffee. It's how we seek to live up to the ethos of this administration, because we know that when President Biden talks about building back better, that means being better for everyone in America. So thank you all. Thank you again to everybody here for your incredibly important work. And now I'm pleased to return it to John Putnam, our Deputy General Counsel, who, along with the whole OGC, has been just a terrific partner in this work. John, back over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for joining all of us this afternoon. We'd like to now turn to Representative Garrett Graves. Representative Graves has represented Louisiana's 6th Congressional District since 2015. More than 750,000 people live in the 13 parishes that make up the 6th District, which includes most of Representative Garrett's hometown of Baton Rouge. He currently serves as the ranking member for the House Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee on Aviation. Although a newer member of that subcommittee, Representative Graves' leadership on transportation issue has been an asset to Congress. And I'm very glad, Representative Graves, that you could join us today from the Capitol.
Hey, all right. Hey, thank you very much, John Putnam and the entire team in the council's office. Want to thank you, and Mr. Secretary, thank you very much. This is a great event, a great time. The Air Carrier Access Act is 35 years old, and I like to remind people that the experience of traveling is stressful. And in this line of work, we end up having to do it most weeks where I'm flying from New Orleans or Baton Rouge into Washington, D.C. And you think about all the things that's traveling to the airport. It's finding a place to park. It's the shuttle to the terminal. It's going check-in and checking bags. It's going through security. It is waiting and navigating to your gate, waiting to get on the plane. And of course, the confines of being on a plane and the uncertainty associated with those logistics in some cases. It is a stressful experience. Now think for just a minute, if you have to add a wheelchair to that equation, if you have to add some other type of assisting device to that equation, where it's getting out of the car with a wheelchair, it's getting onto a shuttle with a wheelchair, security with a wheelchair, it causes a lot more stress, and it really, I think, makes it a much greater or more challenging experience. The Air Carrier Access Act is designed to help to improve that experience, to ensure that having a disability doesn't serve as an impediment to actually being able to get on an airplane, to be able to go visit family, go visit some of the American treasures we have across this great country, to be able to travel for business. We can't allow for disabilities to be impediments. And we haven't been stuck. We haven't been stuck in sort of in a stagnant condition period or time. In fact, in just 2018, in the reauthorization bill, and the Secretary mentioned some of this, we created an advisory committee to make sure that we continue to update, to modernize, to apply common sense to the Air Carrier Access Act. And I'm looking forward to our reauthorization bill in just a couple of short years, where we can build upon the successes, the 35-year history, and the input of the Advisory Council. We added provisions helping to ensure that we're being very thoughtful about wheelchairs and making sure that we're raising damage caps. If the previous caps were too low, we're preventing people from being able to recover their losses as a result of air travel. We've got to make sure that emotional support animals, that animals that are offering assistance, make sure that we're truly focusing on that experience and allowing people who need assistance to be able to bring their support animals along with them. We've all seen some pretty amazing stories about how that was being interpreted, and I think you had some folks who thought that a support ostrich was okay, but we need to make sure that we're focused on the people with real needs and ensure that we're accommodating their needs. And so we put changes in the law in 2018 there, and just in the end of last year, the Department of Transportation was able to make some regulatory changes, helping to address that. I was trying to go back and think of some of the other changes that we did. I mentioned the wheelchair, making sure that it be accommodated and making sure that we have appropriate restraints in place. But look, the bottom line, I'm going to go back and say what I said when I opened. Traveling already is a stressful experience, and we've got to make sure that we're being thoughtful, that we're being proactive, that we're adapting to changing conditions in technology, changing conditions of different disabilities to ensure that we're facilitating this experience and opening up air travel opportunities to all Americans. So I want to thank, again, Deputy General Counsel Putnam. I want to thank Secretary Buttigieg and all of the members of Congress that have worked on a bipartisan basis to protect and improve the Air Carrier Access Act. I give you my commitment, and I'm sure that Republicans and Democrats that will be participating with you today share this, that we look forward to having input from the advisory committee to help us to continue to make improvements in this act to facilitate travel for all Americans. And looking forward to y'all's input as we work toward that reauthorization bill in 2023. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Graves. Really appreciate your thoughts and the time today. I know it's a busy day and a number of votes there on the Hill. I'm going to turn to one of Representative Graves's colleagues, Representative Jim Langevin. Jim Langevin has represented Rhode Island's 2nd Congressional District in the United States House of Representatives since 2001. Representative Langevin is a senior member of the House Armed Services Committee, where he is the chairman of the Cyber, Innovative Technologies, and Information Systems Subcommittee, and also serves on the subcommittees on Sea Power and Protection Forces and Strategic Forces. He's also a senior member on the Committee on Homeland Security, where he serves on the subcommittees on intelligence and counterterrorism and cybersecurity, infrastructure protection, and innovation. Representative Langevin was inspired to enter public service by the tremendous outpouring of support he received during the most challenging time of his life, after a gun accident paralyzed him at age 16 and left him a quadriplegic. He is driven by a belief that everyone deserves a fair opportunity to make the most of their talents. He's a strong advocate for inclusion and independence for people with disabilities and helped pass the ADA Amendments Act that strengthened the protections of the Americans with Disabilities Act. He's also a founder of the Bipartisan Disabilities Caucus and a co-sponsor of the Air Carrier Access Act amendment to protect the rights of air travelers with disabilities. Thank you, Representative, for joining us on what I know is a very busy day for you as well.
Is that my cue? Is that my cue?
I think we need to get Representative Langevin on screen here. And then it looks like we have Representative Rick Larson, who just joined, and he'll be next. Oh, I just got a note that the congressman isn't on, Congressman Langevin isn't on yet. So I'll actually turn to Representative Larson if you're still free.
I am for about 2 minutes.
Okay, that sounds good. I will give you a very short introduction then. Representative Larson represents Washington's 2nd Congressional District which, as I understand, he likes to say is north of Seattle and none of Seattle. And with that, I'll hand you the mic.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. And I have that term about my district in order to describe where it is, because it's a district I've represented for 20 years. I'm very excited to be representative there and excited to be the chair of Aviation subcommittee, where a lot of these issues that we're discussing today are important. So thanks for the introduction. I want to thank the secretary and the DOT for inviting me to join as well. As chair of the Aviation subcommittee, I'm focused on working with ranking member Graves, the Biden administration, consumer advocates, and the industry to ensure passengers have a safe, comfortable, and dignified travel experience. The latest FAA Reauthorization Act includes numerous provisions to enhance the experience of airline passengers, ranging from studying in-cabin wheelchair restraint systems, developing an airline passengers with disabilities Bill of Rights, and rulemaking to define service animal standards. Now, understanding the air passenger experience from the curb to the gate and back again in light of these changes is extremely important. It's critical to ensuring the rights and the safety of all airline passengers. In November 2019, the subcommittee held the first roundtable in recent memory to discuss the latest accessibility provisions in the FAA reauthorization bill and new challenges facing passengers with disabilities, including challenges with boarding aircraft, inaccessible lavatories, inappropriate screening techniques, and damaged wheelchairs and mobility aids. And last March, the subcommittee heard from Lee Page with the Paralyzed Veterans of America on ways Congress can work with industry and stakeholders to help fill the gaps on airplanes and airport accessibility. In 2023, Congress will have another opportunity to continue to improve accessibility in the next FAA reauthorization bill and continue important efforts in place because of legislation like the Air Carrier Access Act. So I look forward to identifying ways Congress can ensure all passengers have a safe, comfortable, and dignified travel experience, and to work with all of you to make improved accessibility a reality, which the ACAA sought in the first place 35 years ago. Thanks again. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much, Representative Larson. Appreciate your taking the time to join us. Appreciate your remarks. And with that, we'll move on to Charles Brown, who's the president of the Paralyzed Veterans of America. Mr. Brown was elected Paralyzed Veteran of America's national president in May 2021 and served as its senior vice president for the prior 3 years. He joined the U.S. Marine Corps in 1985 and sustained a spinal cord injury as a result of a diving accident in 1986 while serving in Cherry Point, North Carolina. During his initial rehabilitation at the Department of Veterans Affairs Spinal Cord Injury Center in Augusta, Georgia, Mr. Brown was introduced to PVA. He became a member of the organization and has served in a multitude of capacities, including as the Americans with Disabilities Act coordinator and advocacy director for PVA. Mr. Brown has also represented the organization on numerous national committees, and we're very pleased and honored that you could join us today, Mr. Brown, and we'll hand you the mic.
Charlie, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. My apologies. Thank you, Mr. Putnam. I am honored to join such a distinguished panel of guests as part of today's commemoration of the 35th anniversary of the Air Carrier Access Act. Paralyzed Veterans of America has been fighting to improve access to air travel for people with disabilities for nearly 40 years. In the early 80s, PVA had grown frustrated with the continued abuse, treatment and disregard for the rights of people with disabilities. Passengers with disabilities were routinely required by airlines to follow requirements that were not based on safety. For example, they can be made to sit on blankets for fears they might soil the passenger seat, or could be made or could be told that they were too disabled to travel without an assistant, leaving passengers with disabilities with no recourse. PVA took action and sued the Civil Rights Avionics Board under Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act. This case, which ultimately went to the U.S. Supreme Court, failed to result in civil rights protections across all airlines for air travelers with disabilities. Despite this setback, we did not back down. Instead, we began working with congressional leaders, including Senator Robert Dole, a Republican from Kansas, and Representative Norman Mineta, a Democrat from California, who later went on to serve as the Transportation Secretary. Within 3 months, the ACAA was introduced, passed, and signed into law by President Ronald Reagan, providing sweeping protections for people with disabilities in air travel. It was a truly bipartisan effort that recognized the importance of air travel access for all people with disabilities. PVA participated in the development of the ACAA regulations that detail the protections the law provides for passengers with disabilities. These regulations require airlines to provide people with disabilities with boarding and deplaning assistance from trained employees or contractors, priority storage of a manual wheelchair in the cabin, and access to needed seating accommodations. Safe and accessible air travel is a basic civil right. Yet despite the protections in the ACAA, the air travel process is far from seamless and at times is even unsafe for passengers with disabilities. Unfortunately, falls and serious injuries are still too common. Long waits and ill-fitting boarding chairs can cause unnecessary bruises, falls, and/or serious pressure sores that can lead to severe health consequences for passengers, even death. Broken wheelchairs, scooters, and other adaptive devices are also a real concern for passengers who depend on them. According to the data provided by airlines, 14,000 wheelchairs, scooters, and adaptive devices were damaged, delayed, or lost in 2019 and 2020. A mishandled wheelchair means a loss of independence, sometimes for weeks at a time. It can also lead to bodily harm as customized wheelchairs provide important functions for their users. Unfortunately, I have personal experience with many of these problems in navigating air travel. And as the new leader of PVA, I need to travel extensively throughout the United States and Puerto Rico to work with our members and our chapters across this nation to promote the mission of our organization. On one such trip in January of 2019, I was injured when I was dropped being transferred from my wheelchair to the aisle chair. Unfortunately, the assistance that I was receiving wasn't trained properly enough to transfer when the individual holding my legs let go, leaving all the weight on the individual behind me, dropping me to the jetway and causing a severe injury. After returning home, I was actually admitted to the hospital where I was found out that I had a fractured tailbone. I had an infection forming, and my health was severely compromised. I spent over 3 months in the Department of Veterans Affairs hospitals, receiving treatment, surgeries, and other such items to regain my independence and health. I'm fortunate that I did recover, and I was very apprehensive when flying next. It took a lot for me to put the trust back into the airlines, but I did. I had to, because the airlines are important for transportation with those with disabilities. For them and us, airlines create a vital access across our nation to family, friends, work, and other things. PVA believes that most problems experienced by passengers with disabilities result from inadequate training for those who assist us with disabilities, limited opportunity for passengers. The lack of accessibility doesn't end when you go to the airplane. It also extends on the aircraft when they have limited access to laboratories or some not accessible to it at all. Less than 5% of the single-aisle airplanes across this nation have accessible laboratories in 2019. The lack of access often requires those with mobility issues to take extreme measures like fasting and dehydrating oneself for hours or days before a flight for fear of humiliation in flight. We greatly appreciate the support we have received from Congress in the recent years and from all the other disability rights groups that are out there fighting with us to make sure that the ACAA Reauthorization Act of 2018 was passed and signed into law in October 2018. PVA has been honored to serve on the committee along with representatives of the disabilities community, veterans, airlines, and other stakeholders. As part of this committee, we are able to work on requirements included in the reauthorization, such as the development of a Bill of Rights for passengers with disabilities and the review of regulatory requirements related to training of board and deplaning assistance. Another important provision of the law was a study on the feasibility of individuals flying in the cabin using their own wheelchairs, which are often customized to the individual. PVA members Peter Axelson and Dr. Roy Cooper, who will be presenting later today, were both appointed to serve on the study committee. The resulting report was given hope to many wheelchair users that flying in your wheelchair will one day be a reality in commercial air travel. We appreciate the collective action that has been taken in concert with stakeholders such as airlines, wheelchair manufacturers, and airports throughout the years to improve air travel with people with disabilities. While we believe these efforts have led to changes that will make the air travel experience of passengers with disabilities better, we believe that more must be done. That is why PVA is a strong supporter of efforts to reform the Air Carrier Access Act and believes that passage of the Air Carriers Access Amendments Act would make desperately needed systemic improvements for passengers with disabilities. The amendments would strengthen the ACAA administration enforcement and establish a private right of action to allow passengers with disabilities to enforce their civil rights under the ACAA in the court of law. It would also ensure that new airplanes are designed to accommodate the needs of people with disabilities by requiring airlines to meet defined accessibility standards. Currently, disability access is almost non-existent on most commercial flight aircraft and has improved very little in 35 years. Finally, it would require removal of access barriers on existing airplanes to the extent that it is readily achievable, that is easily accomplished, and may be done without much difficulty or expense. We believe the reforming of the ACAA will result in air travel experiences for people with disabilities that include passengers who use wheelchairs rolling onto the airplane and either locking into the wheelchair spot on the aircraft or easily transferring directly to their seat. People with disabilities will also be able to access the lavatory with dignity and other aircraft features such as an in-flight entertainment and communications. If wheelchairs must be stowed, then airplanes will have cargo doors that can adequately accommodate these assistive devices and ensure that they will be protected from damage. I want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I want to say thank you to the staff that has helped me prepare this statement, and thank you to those that have served on the committee and those representatives that are representing us in Congress and in front of the nation. What you do in fighting for our access and our health and our protection is greatly appreciated, and I want to say thank you. Mr. Putnam, thank you, sir, for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Really appreciate your perspectives, your experience, your wisdom, and also your service on the Air Carrier Access Act Advisory Committee. Going to move now to Representative Langevin. Thank you so much for joining. I know that there are votes going on the Hill today. Actually already provided an introduction, but as a reminder, Representative Langevin represents Rhode Island's 2nd Congressional District since 2001 and has been a passionate defender of the interests of those with disabilities. Representative, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
You bet, John. Thank you very much for having me and for accommodating the schedule. We are in the middle of a vote series right now, so I'm going to have to depart as soon as my remarks conclude. But I'm glad I could be on, and I'm glad to hear the comments that Charles made. And like Charles, I am also paralyzed. I'm a C6 quadriplegic. And so all the challenges that Charles was outlining and talking about, I've lived those too, and we are certainly kindred spirits, and we're in this together to try to make air travel easier and more accommodating for people with disabilities. But just let me say good afternoon to everyone on the Zoom today. And John, thank you for the introduction and for having me here today. As John mentioned, I'm Congressman Jim Langevin, and I have the privilege of representing the 2nd Congressional District of Rhode Island. I know that Secretary Buttigieg spoke already, as I understand it. And let me just say, I want to thank the Secretary for his thoughtful remarks and for his ongoing commitment to protecting the rights of travelers with disabilities. And I'd also like to congratulate you and Chasten on becoming new parents. And so hope that message gets back to the Secretary. But I'm also I'm glad to be here today with several of my colleagues. I know that Representative Larson has spoke or will be speaking, and Congressman Graves, as well as Senators Baldwin and Duckworth, two good friends of mine, former colleagues here in the House, and now they're over on the Senate side, as well as of course the other distinguished guests from the White House. The air travel industry and disabilities community that really underscore the importance of accessible air travel. So you all know, in June 1986, the Supreme Court dealt a major blow to the rights of air travelers with disabilities. Namely, it ruled that Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 did not apply to commercial airlines, effectively allowing air carriers to discriminate against travelers with disabilities. Well, no, of course, Congress responded quickly on a bipartisan basis and passed the Air Carrier Access Act, a bill to codify protections for air travelers with disabilities. And thank God they did. On October 2nd, 1986, less than 4 months after the Supreme Court's decision, President Ronald Reagan signed the Air Carrier Access Act into law. And for the past 35 years, it's had a tremendous impact, especially prohibiting commercial airlines from discriminating against people with disabilities, ensuring that air carriers make reasonable accommodations. Now, as many of you know, this is very personal for me, as I mentioned. To put it simply, again, I'm a quadriplegic with a 350 each way. So for nearly 21 years now, I've been flying back and forth between my home in Warwick, Rhode Island, and my office here on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. So for me, accessible air travel isn't just a luxury, it is a must. In fact, I can confidently say that without the protections afforded by the Air Carrier Access Act, I probably would not be able to do my job in the way that I'm able to do it. But as we celebrate the Air Carrier Access Act and look back at all the progress we've made, we also need to acknowledge that people with disabilities continue to encounter significant barriers when they fly commercial. These include, as Charles mentioned, damaged assistive devices and wheelchairs, delayed assistance, poor communication, and the lack of accessible seating accommodations. And I have to tell you all the things that I've personally experienced. In fact, I can remember flying to Omaha, Nebraska several years ago. And as I'm sitting on the plane, someone decided it would be a good idea when they took the wheelchair out of the cargo hold, the electric wheelchair that I use to get around. They left it on the belt loader, and they lifted it up. They thought they were just going to bring it up to the door of the plane without even thinking to properly secure it or lock it in place or have somebody hold on to it. And I'm sitting on the plane as I watch the belt loader go up, and my wheelchair just unsecured, goes right off the belt loader and smashes to the ground. And in the middle of the night, unfortunately. So I have to say that I get an uneasy feeling every time my wheelchair gets brought out of the hold, and I'm wondering if it's going to be brought up in one piece. After all, if it gets damaged, those are my legs basically, and I'm stranded if the chair is damaged, doesn't get to me in one piece. So this again is personal for me, In 2018, passengers actually filed nearly 37,000 disability-related complaints with air carriers. This, my friends, is absolutely unacceptable, and we must do better for the 61 million Americans with disabilities. And that's why earlier this year, I worked with Representatives Titus and Cohen and Senators Baldwin and Duckworth to introduce the Air Carrier Access Amendments Act. So this legislation builds on the Air Carrier Access Act to better ensure that people with disabilities have truly equal access to the skies. It would direct the Access Board to issue updated standards for new aircraft and order the removal of access barriers on existing planes. It would also require the Department of Transportation to assess civil penalties when airlines violate the rights of passengers with disabilities and refer cases that reflect a pattern of discrimination to the Department of Justice for further investigation. Additionally, it would establish a private right of action for air travelers with disabilities whose rights are violated, allowing them to have their day in court to enforce the law. So our overarching goal is to make society fully accessible and inclusive to all, and accessible transportation is an integral of this goal. The Air Carrier Access Accommodations Act lays out several important and more than that necessary steps to help us get there. And I'm going to keep working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and both sides of Capitol to address its core provisions. So just to close, I just want to reemphasize that the Air Carrier Access Act has been a tremendous success. And I thank all the giants that have gone before us to see that that law was enacted in the first place, and to President Reagan for signing into law. But as we celebrate the 35 years that it's been the law of the land, let's all make a pledge to build on it. That is to make air travel more accessible and do better for the millions of Americans with disabilities striving to live independent lives. So with that, let me just say thank you again for inviting me to participate. And John, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Langevin. Really appreciate your remarks this afternoon, as well as bringing your experience to our implementation of the Air Carrier Access, as well as to Congress. Just one housekeeping item as a reminder, if you're not on screen, do please put on the mute button. We're getting a little bit of feedback, so want to make sure that everybody can hear as well as possible. Next, I'd like to introduce some pre-recorded remarks from Nick Callio, the President and CEO of Airlines for America. Unfortunately, Mr. Callio was not able to join us live today, but he did record some remarks that we'll share. Mr. Callio is President and CEO of Airlines for America, the trade association for the country's leading passenger and cargo airlines. Under his leadership, A4A rebranded and honed its focus on being an influential voice and helping to shape legislative and regulatory policies and priorities to improve the air travel experience. Among other positions, Mr. Callio served President George W. Bush as Assistant to the President for Legislative Affairs from January 2001 to January 2003. As the President's principal liaison to Congress, he had the primary responsibility for formulating and implementing White House strategy on all legislative issues. He held the same position during the administration of President George H.W. Bush. Mr. Callio has received numerous leadership and philanthropic awards, and we're glad that we're able to share his thoughts on camera this afternoon.
Thank you, John. Airlines for America appreciates the opportunity to be part of this event as we commemorate the 35th anniversary of the Air Carrier Access Act. The U.S. airline industry strongly supports the mission and purpose of the ACAA, and we understand the importance of promoting freedom of movement within the disability community. I would like to recognize the work that the Department of Transportation has done, working closely with industry over the past 35 years. We appreciate the extensive efforts to identify obstacles and solutions through the ACAA Advisory Committee, which has brought stakeholders from all perspectives together over the past several years. I especially want to thank Secretary Buttigieg for his dedication to this industry and to our customers, the traveling public. Under his leadership, we will continue working collaboratively so that people of all abilities are able to travel by air with dignity to visit family, friends, and colleagues. Air transportation accessibility has come a long way in the last 35 years. This is demonstrated by the significant increase in travelers with disabilities who trust our carriers every day. Airlines have increased the amount of information made available to assist with disability travel. And we appreciate efforts made by DOT to increase resources as well. Our passenger airlines have made significant investments to develop products and services to aid those with disabilities. This includes increased accessibility features at kiosks, onboard entertainment systems, and modifications to mobile apps. U.S. Airlines now have dedicated agents with specialized training to address the accessibility needs of travelers. Airlines have also increased the use of mobility aid services, and travelers will see additional accessibility resources from curb to gate. Airlines are working closely with our airport partners to enhance the overall travel experience. For example, some travelers may see new and improved wayfinding solutions to help guide them through the airport to the aircraft. But we know there is more work to do. An open and honest dialogue is the first step to identifying solutions and implementing improvements. To foster greater and more effective communication, Airlines for America held its first Air Transportation Accessibility Summit last month. The event generated in-depth discussions between the industry and the disability community about some of the hurdles and how we can address them. The summit addressed a wide range of topics, including airport navigation, mobility aid handling, and communications to travelers with disabilities. We are hopeful that the big tent discussions will expand in the coming months and years, so we hear from more voices, helping all of us to have a greater understanding and reaching common solutions. Also, we value our participation in several initiatives, including the Department of Transportation's Air Carrier Access Advisory Committee, the Rehabilitation, Engineering, and Assistive Technology Society of North American Standards Committee for Assistive Technology for Air Travel, and the development of the Passenger Accessibility Operations Manual by our international partner, IATA. Our member airlines are working closely with these groups on several initiatives, like improving the accessibility of lavatories on single-aisle aircraft. I've talked about solutions for the traveling public, but our commitment to the accessibility also extends to our employees, the men and women who proudly work in the airline industry. We joined the national commemoration this month for Disability Employment Awareness Month. Our carriers have implemented a wide range of initiatives to attract and sustain an increasingly diverse workforce. We're proud that some of our member airlines have been recognized as some of the best places to work for disability inclusion. There is no doubt that a diverse workforce, including employees with disabilities, makes our industry much stronger. As the airline industry emerges from the pandemic, we are committed to continuing our collaborative work and to implementing solutions that increase accessibility. We value our partnerships with the Department of Transportation and with the disability community. Once again, thank you for including A4 in today's event. We look forward to the next 35 years.
And we appreciate having Mr. Callio join us this afternoon. As Mr. Callio mentioned, a critical part, and many of the speakers have noticed, a critical part of every traveler's journey is in the airports themselves. So we're very glad to have Mr. Kevin Burke, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Airports Council International North America. Mr. Burke joined ACAA in January 2014. Since he joined ACI, Mr. Burke has expanded ACI-NA's reach and influence as the voice of airports in North America by amplifying the important role of airports in air travel. In addition to his expansive government relations background and experiencing managing associations, Mr. Burke serves the airport industry as an advocate for legislative and regulatory policies that strengthen the ability for airports to serve their passengers, customers, and communities, including those policies that affect disabled passengers as related to the Americans with Disability Act. Mr. Burke, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Well, thank you, John, for the opportunity to participate in today's event as the industry's celebrates the 35th anniversary of the Air Carrier Access Act. I'm honored to be with all of you today, and I wish to salute the leadership of Secretary Buttigieg and the entire team at DOT for their work on this very, very important issue for the traveling public. Now, like other stakeholders participating in today's event, airports across the United States remain fully committed to continue to improve the accessibility of travel for all. Everyone deserves the opportunity to experience the joys and the benefits of travel, whether it be for fun or for business. Travel is essential for learning, for sharing, and for experiencing all that the world has to offer. And airports exist to provide for the safe, secure, and efficient movement of people and goods. Airport operators want the same thing for their passengers, and exactly what they want, and that is a hassle-free, convenient travel experience. Everyone's travel experience should be free from the common hassles and challenges that sometimes exist, especially for those with a visible or many times a hidden disability. Now, while airports comply with a myriad of federal, state, and local regulations, including the FAA's implementation of the Rehabilitation Act and DOJ regulations stemming from the Americans with Disabilities Act, they view their work as an aspirational commitment to the passengers and their communities that they serve. Our nation's airports often work beyond those issues, outside of their compliance framework, including supporting their airline partners with their own Air Carriers Access Act requirements. Our airlines are, in fact, our partners in this mission. But in recent years, we have seen airports deploy new programs and facilities to enhance the passenger experience for everyone who passes through all of our terminals by creating sensory rooms and quiet spaces, adding facilities to accommodate service animals, and deploying programs like Wings for Autism broadly across the U.S. Airports continually strive to improve the accessibility of their facilities and work together with their airlines, their government, and community partners to reduce barriers to travel. Now, the key here is collaboration. The importance of collaboration and our shared commitment, in our view, cannot be underestimated. The communities our airports serve set very, very high standards, and airports are working to exceed those expectations by ensuring the needs of travelers are met throughout this journey, which often go above and beyond the regulatory mandates and requirements set by local and federal government standards. Through these important community partnerships, airports are working locally to launch visual assistance programs, installing restroom facilities for adults with disabilities, and creating other specialized programs to ensure passenger needs are met proactively. Of course, challenges do remain, and we all know that. Today, we celebrate the 35th anniversary of this important legislation, while the average airport terminal in the United States is over 40 years old. Now, with that said, advancement and accessibility are an essential consideration in every single airport capital improvement project that has been completed, that is underway, or is being considered by the industry in the future. Now, as airports continue to rethink the entire travel experience as we emerge from this COVID-19 pandemic, key investments in public health and accessibility infrastructure will, of course, be required. At present, airports face a backlog of over $115 billion in infrastructure needs through the year 2023. Now, airports appreciate the $20 billion included in the bipartisan infrastructure plan for airports, and we support the bill and continue to call on the House to vote for it as soon as possible. Now, by modernizing our airport facilities, we can further eliminate barriers to travel to enhance accessibility to everyone who passes through our nation's airports. And Mr. Secretary, we want to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this event. We look forward to continuing to work with you, the department, our airline partners, and the disability community on these very, very important issues. Again, thank you for having me here today on this distinguished panel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burke. Appreciate your remarks, appreciate your partnership as being a critical part of the chain to get people safely and with dignity where they need to be. Next, very pleased to present Dr. Rory Cooper, who is a professor of rehabilitation and science technology, an inventor and an author of multiple disability-related publications, as well as a medaled Paralympian. He's the founding director and senior research career scientist of the Human Engineering Research Laboratories, a VA Rehabilitation Research and Development Center of Excellence in partnership with the University of Pittsburgh, as well as one of our centers of excellence with DOT. As a U.S. Army veteran with a spinal cord injury, many of Dr. Cooper's publications are related to improving treatment and technology for veterans with disabilities. Among his many accomplishments, Dr. Cooper authored a book on wheelchair selection and configuration, serves as the director of the Paralyzed Veterans of America Research Foundation, and is an accomplished athlete who won a bronze medal in the 1988 Paralympic Games in Seoul, Korea. Dr. Cooper, we are very honored that you could join us this afternoon, and thanks for joining us. Dr. Cooper, you're on mute.
Thank you, John. I'm honored to be on this distinguished panel and to celebrate the 35th anniversary of the Air Carrier Access Act. If anything, I'd like to leave you with two messages today. One of them is that we need to move beyond accessibility towards inclusion when we talk about airline travel, so that all of us can travel with dignity, safety, and certainty. I would not be able to do my job if it were not for the ACAA. And I had the experience of traveling prior to the passage of the ACAA and some of the challenges that entailed. For example, booking a ticket and then having the airline refuse to take you on the trip, stranding you halfway into a trip. Every time I left home, I know my wife was always concerned about when and if, how I would get home when traveling in an airplane. There are times where I'd get to the airport and I'd get to the gate ready to board my plane, and I would be told that I needed an attendant to travel. I don't typically use an attendant. So I would have to ask a passenger who was traveling on the flight if they would be willing to serve as an attendant or at least tell the airlines they would be willing to serve as my attendant. Fortunately, most Americans in the traveling public were willing to do so, because when they asked what it entailed, it really didn't entail anything but telling the flight attendant or the agent at the gate that they would be willing to assist if needed. Connections were terrible. I remember one trip, I was traveling to Boston to participate in the National Veterans Wheelchair Games hosted by Paralyzed Veterans of America and the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. I had a layover. I was flying from California and I had a layover in Denver. And unfortunately, I made it to Denver, but my wheelchair didn't. The airlines put me in one of the transport wheelchairs that had a large sign advertising for some company, and parked me literally in a storage closet for about 4 hours. Now, this is prior to cell phones, so I couldn't even get help. I finally yelled long enough and pounded on the door long enough that I was let out. Unfortunately, I got to Boston, and I got there. I was delivered a wheelchair with 2 heart-shaped wheels. And so thank goodness I was attending the National Veterans Wheelchair Games, and the local VA was able to provide me with a loaner wheelchair for that time period, and able to order me new wheels so that I could get home for my trip. And that's just a simple example. Boarding was another significant challenge and remains so today. At that time, if you were lucky enough to get on a flight, you wouldn't necessarily be able to board first or board last, which is common today after the passage of the ACAA. So you might actually be boarded last and be on a full flight, and then try to get through the aisleways and get past people when all the bins are full and all their stuff is stored under their seat. And an armrest didn't fold up. So you could get on a flight, but have to transfer over an armrest, which is, for some people, you might as well say, why don't you jump over that building next to you? And but I would say the ACA approved a lot of those. You know, there are now pre-boarding, there are onboard chairs, there are aisle chairs, but there are challenges we still have to address. Some of them have been mentioned already. One of them, I think, is that many people choose not to fly today. As Charles knows from Paralyzed Veterans America, some of his members will choose to drive for days rather than get on an airplane. And that needs, and part of the reason for that is that they need specialized seating, or they have a specialized wheelchair that they need to use that accommodates their ability to be able to sit for longer periods of time. And they may need to be able to use those to be able to sit in a wheelchair. So that's something for the Department of Transportation to work on as new aircraft designs are come out, new standards are developed, and new guidelines. Aisle widths have gotten smaller. So individuals that are, so a normal individual, the aisle width, when you walk, your hips are above the armrests. But when you're transported in a transport wheelchair, your hips are at armrest height. And so they often are too narrow for many Americans with disabilities. Things we need to work on, we've talked about, is single aisle aircraft toilets, and so that people can travel with dignity and don't have to go through extreme measures to travel safely. Planing and deplaning is another important problem. Even though there's this match between the airlines and the airport, where you have to be able to get down the ramp and safely get on the plane. Sometimes there's a lip involved. Sometimes the angle or at the bottom of the gateway or the ramp is very steep or a multiply complex angle, and people can fall from there and get hurt from the aisle chairs that are used. Transport assistance devices often don't accommodate individuals who have limited seating balance or are at risk for pressure injuries. And then I think the other, and there's also assistance with bags and with luggage. Being able to have carry-on items so that you know that you have the minimum safe items if your luggage is lost on the trip, so you can be medically safe when you get to the other side. Or to be able to put something in an overhead binge, or perhaps have storage that you don't need to lift all the way to the overhead binge. But I do think, trip planning is another one. It's really important to be able to plan the entire trip. So you know the layovers, you know where you're going to sit, you know how much time you have in between, and you know if assistance is going to be available. And ideally, if you can track your assistive technology to know where it is at all times, to make sure you know it got on the plane and hopefully that it's in good condition. And then we have to make sure that our devices arrive safely. And for example, you may want your device to arrive at your layover destination on the way before you get to your final destination in order to make that transition safe and simpler. And then I think along those lines, it was nice to hear this. It would be great to see airlines and airports hire more people with disabilities to be engaged in the process to make accommodations, but as an inclusion. Multiple perspectives are important to improve innovation and quality of any business, and airlines and airports are no exception to that. I would like to leave on a positive note that the ACAA has made it possible for me to work and to travel as part of my work, and being a professor, that's critically important, as well as being a scientist and engineer. And then lastly, to participate in sports and family and healthcare. Some people have to travel. Even in my own case, I've had to access healthcare that's not accessible in my community. And so we have to think about the importance that the airlines play and airports play in our entire community. So I'd like to repeat what I said at the beginning of my talk. We need to move beyond accessibility towards inclusion. We need to make sure that people with disabilities have their voice heard. And we need to, and I do think it's important to make that possible, that we work towards having more people with disabilities be professionals in the transportation industry. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cooper. Really appreciate your remarks this afternoon, your research in this field, and your assistance to the department in implementing the ACAA. Next, we're honored to be joined by Senator Tammy Baldwin. U.S. Senator Baldwin was born in Madison, Wisconsin, and raised by her grandparents in the Badger State. In 1992, she was elected to the Wisconsin State Assembly, serving 3 terms. In 1998, Wisconsin's 2nd Congressional District elected her to Congress, and after serving 14 years in the House of Representatives, she was elected to the United States Senate in 2012. Senator Baldwin was reelected in 2018, and she currently serves on the Senate Appropriations Committee and is the chair of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture, Rural Development, and Food and Drug Administration. She is also a member of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pension, and the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, and has sponsored legislation to protect the rights of air travelers with disabilities. Thank you so much for joining us on what I know is a very busy day.
Well, thank you so much for that generous introduction. And I also want to extend my thanks to Secretary Buttigieg for bringing us together to mark this anniversary of the Air Carrier Access Act. Now, 35 years ago, this was such an important step towards equal access to travel. But today we know that a lot more work remains to be done. Too many travelers with disabilities encounter significant barriers, including, as we've heard, damage to their assistive devices and wheelchairs, delayed assistance, ineffective communication, and a lack of seating accommodations. These individuals are our veterans, our athletes, and folks traveling for both business or pleasure. We know that air travel for everyone has been interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm going to cite some statistics from 2018, which was a more normal year for travel. In that year, nearly 37,000 disability-related complaints were filed. And that's an increase over the year before. And these are just the incidents that are reported and that we know about. We need to break down barriers that individuals with disabilities face when they travel. And so today, as we mark the decades since enactment of a law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in air travel, I encourage us all to commit to the needed improvements to that law. Equal access to air travel is about fairness and it's about freedom. That's why I've worked with my colleagues that are also joining you today, Senator Duckworth and Congressman Langevin, to introduce the Air Carrier Access Amendments Act. This legislation would update the 35-year-old law to improve standards for air travel and makes services more inclusive and responsive, including improved accessibility and enhancing assistance for travelers who have a disability. In 2018, we actually took some major steps forward in the Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization Act. In line with our legislation, Congress created the Advisory Committee on the air travel needs of passengers with disabilities, tasked the Department of Transportation with developing an Air Passengers with Disabilities Bill of Rights, and initiated a study on the ways in which individuals using wheelchairs can be accommodated with in-cabin wheelchair restraint systems. Under the Biden administration, I know that Secretary Buttigieg is committed to seeing these measures carried through. And so I want to thank him again and all of you for participating. It's great to be brought here together to celebrate and observe the 35th anniversary, but also to rededicate ourselves to what is to come. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Mr. Putnam.
Thank you very much, Senator Baldwin. Appreciate your being able to join us today. Appreciate your remarks, and we look forward to implementing those next steps. Also greatly honored to be joined by Senator Tammy Duckworth, who has served as the U.S. Senator for the state of Illinois since 2016. Previously, Senator Duckworth served 2 terms representing Illinois' 8th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. Senator Duckworth is an Iraq War veteran, Purple Heart recipient, and was among the first handful of Army women to fly combat missions during Operation Iraqi Freedom. She lost her legs and partial use of her right arm in 2004 when her helicopter was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. Senator Duckworth serves on the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee and is a sponsor of the Air Carrier Access Act amendment to protect the rights of air travelers with disabilities. She was also recognized by the Center for Effective Lawmaking as among the top 5 most effective Democratic senators overall and the most effective on transportation issues in the 116th Congress. She was also recognized as the most effective freshman Democratic senator in the 115th Congress. Senator Duckworth, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and thanks for joining us.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. It's really good to be here. I want to start off by thanking Secretary Buttigieg and his team for helping to recognize the 35th anniversary of the Air Carrier Access Act of 1986. It's really wonderful to see representation from such a broad coalition of aviation stakeholders. And it's always a thrill for me to follow the chairwoman of the Tammy Caucus, Senator Baldwin. And it's so great to see everybody here today. You know, accessibility at airports and abroad aircraft have improved significantly since 1986, but we still have a really long way to go before we reach true equality for disabled travelers. I want to associate myself with the comments of many of today's participants, and specifically with those of Senator Baldwin. She and I have worked closely on these issues since I was first elected to the Senate. And together with our Senate colleagues and leaders in the House, like my friend, Representative Langevin and Larson's, we included several provisions in the 2018 FAA reauthorization bill to enhance the disabled customer experience and provide more equity in service. Senator Baldwin has already gone over them, so I won't go over them again. But I have to say that I experienced many of the frustrations of disabled travelers, which is why I felt so strongly that I wanted to include many of the provisions in the bill. You know, I've had several of my own wheelchairs damaged during flights. I was able then to pass a policy that required airlines to report how many chairs they damage every month, forcing them to treat our wheelchairs as what they are, complex medical devices, not just suitcases to be tossed around. You know, if people really treated wheelchairs and medical devices as part of our body, I think most Americans would be appalled if they heard that an airline had broken 10,000 legs in the past year. And yet, you know, 10,000 wheelchairs being broken barely gets any interest. Well, we're going to change that. Where do we go from here? Well, we need to continue to tear down the barriers and the obstacles that travelers like me face every time we enter an aircraft or enter an airport. I'm very proud to rejoin Senator Baldwin and Representative Langevin in sponsoring the Air Carrier Access Amendment Act that will ensure that aircraft are designed with the needs of the disabled community in mind through clearly defined accessibility standards to include in-cabin wheelchair restraint systems, but even just having closets big enough to put a manual wheelchair in there so that you don't have to put my wheelchair in the cargo hold. I'm very pleased to hear that DOT will be hosting conversations in the coming months that complement these legislative efforts. And we have to strengthen enforcement of the Air Carrier Access Act through increased oversight by both the Departments of Transportation and the Department of Justice, as well as allowing civil penalties to be levied when violations occur. Each of these efforts is critical to ensuring air travel is accessible for all users. We also know that accessibility barriers are not unique to airlines and airports. As the disability community knows far too well, we face strong headwinds all across all modes of transportation, whether it's public transit, accessible vehicle design, or passenger rail challenges. You can be assured that I will continue to work to eliminate all transportation barriers, no matter where they are. Thank you to everyone in this room for being my partner in this work, including, of course, Secretary Buttigieg. With that, I will turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth, and glad that we could host the entire Tammy caucus here this afternoon, and really appreciate your leadership on these issues. Our last speaker is Emily Vorda, who is joining us from the White House. Ms. Vorda serves as the Biden administration's White House Associate Director of Disability Outreach in the Office of Public Engagement. She was born with osteogenesis imperfecta and is a wheelchair user. Much of her work in the White House is ensuring that space is carved out for voices of persons with disabilities across policy issues. Among her many roles is soliciting input from multiple marginalized populations through listening sessions, partnering with agencies to ensure that policy reaches stakeholders, and recommending opportunities for the President, First Lady, Vice President, and Second Gentleman to engage with the disability community in meaningful ways. Ms. Vorda, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and closing out our program.
Thank you so much, John, and to everyone here on the call. I don't think I would have thought that I'd see the day when I had the opportunity to speak alongside such wonderful change makers in our community, including Secretary Buttigieg and Senators Baldwin and Duckworth. So thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with you here today. As John mentioned, my name is Emily Vorda, and I serve as the White House's liaison to disabled Americans in the Office of Public Engagement. To provide a brief visual description, I'm a white woman with blonde, shoulder-length hair. I'm wearing a black sleeveless top, and as you can't see in the frame, but as John mentioned, I'm also a manual wheelchair user and have been for most of my entire life. Today, on the 35th anniversary of the Air Carrier Access Act, and every day, this administration's commitment to access, inclusion, and equity for disabled Americans is of both personal and professional importance to me. As the front doors of the White House, as we call it, the Office of Public Engagement is tasked with inviting Americans from across the country to share in and contribute to the work of this administration. Specifically, my role is to welcome those with disability, regardless of diagnosis, into our work, to share and to form our work. In total, that amasses to over 1 in 5 Americans, spanning geography, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic status. As the Secretary mentioned at the top of our call, someone can face disability, be diagnosed with a disability at any point in their lives. And regardless of whether they are going to wear that disability on their sleeve, the federal government is here to provide protections to ensure, again, that they receive the dignity and independence that they deserve. Consistent with legal and cultural understandings, the administration celebrates disability as encompassing those with physical disabilities like myself, as well as those with invisible diagnoses, mental health diagnoses, chronic illness, and the newest members of our community, as we understand them, those with the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. We, disabled Americans, are your neighbors, friends, colleagues, and family members. We're frontline healthcare workers, scientists, teachers, parents, caregivers, public servants, and community organizers. Thanks to the advocacy of so many in our community, including the paralyzed veterans at the cornerstone of this legislation, disabled Americans are able to access every corner of this great nation through air travel. Modern day champions, including Senators Duckworth and Baldwin, Representative Langevin, President Biden, and Secretary Buttigieg, are committed to ensuring that access is dignified. Upon taking office, it was clear that the Biden administration had to confront an immediate economic crisis, the most significant recession we'd seen since the Depression, but that it wasn't going to be enough. We also had to make some long-term investments in Americans in America itself. The first thing we did was to write and pass the American Rescue Plan, which provided an invaluable influx of funds to to Americans across the country, and it's working. Our economy has added more than 4 million jobs, and right now our economic growth is leading the world's advanced economies. But to win the future, we know that we need to take the next great step. We need to ensure that economic benefits are felt by everybody, including over 70 million Americans with disabilities. As Secretary Pete mentioned, the Department of Transportation receives over 1,000 complaints of damage to personal medical equipment each month. This damage amounts to more than inconsequential scratches and bumps. As my fellow wheelchair users know, minor scratches are par for the course. Standard wear and tear is symbolic of our movement through this world, our commitment to our careers, our contribution to the economy, our time spent building our families, and our exploration of this world. But the damage rendered at the hands of commercial airlines is far more than standard wear and tear, oh so frequently. Every single day, airlines render personal medical equipment inoperable. As you've heard time and time again on this call, that damage is more than minimal and threatens dignity, livelihood, and independence. As I've heard Senator Duckworth characterize, as well as Representative Langevin just on this call, damage is equivalent to breaking a passenger's legs. For those tuned in, I hope you never experienced the sense of despair and helplessness felt when an airline returns a damaged chair. I hope you never sit on that jet bridge with no alternative for moving independently. From that moment forward, a chain reaction has been set off that immediately degrades one's dignity, independence, and economic potential. You're unable to spend valuable time with loved ones, lead that business meeting that you were en route to, celebrate the wedding of a good friend, or explore America's rich communities. Customized equipment doesn't only ensure comfort, but it prevents injury through the incorporation of life-saving respiratory and communication technology. Until your equipment is repaired, which can often take weeks, if not months, your independence and dignity are challenged. In these moments of despair, wheelchair users don't want your pity or apology. They want insurance that this won't happen again. Under the leadership of President Biden, this administration is committed to building back better for all Americans, including those with disabilities. The president understands that legislation, including the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Air Carrier Access Act, are more than feathers in our nation's cap, that they are instead sources of opportunity, participation, and self-sufficiency. He, like the secretary, also understands that there's still work to be done. Thank you, Secretary Buttigieg, for your urgency, action, and recommitment to ensure the protection of Americans with disabilities' dignity. Thank you to all on the call who are making this a priority and ensuring that we move with haste to improve the livelihood and experience of air travel for those with disabilities. Thank you, and with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Putnam.
Thank you, Ms. Verdi. Really appreciate both your personal perspective and then also providing the perspective on the leadership of President Biden and the administration. And with that, in closing, I'd like to again express my thanks to each of our speakers and attendees for participating in today's celebratory event. It's really been a great day, and really appreciate all of you who have listened in for joining us today to be part of this critical celebration. We've heard about the positive impact the ACAA has had on the air travel experience for persons with disabilities, as well as the work that the department and others are doing to further improve that experience. By working together, I'm confident that we can achieve our common goal of making flying truly accessible and inclusive, as Dr. Cooper noted, for people with disabilities. Before the program closes, I'd like to take a moment to thank Blaine Werke, our Assistant General Counsel for Aviation Consumer Protection, and her whole team for the important work that they do on a day-to-day basis to improve the air travel environment for persons with disabilities and for organizing today's celebratory event. A video of this celebration will be publicly available soon, at which time we'll send a link to all the participants in today's event, and I hope you share it widely. Thank you all and have a great day. Thank you very much.